Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want you to think about something that sounds boring until the day it saves your whole life. A record. Not a memory, not a feeling, not your side of the story. A record. A timestamp, a file, a photograph with the light in it, a voice saved somewhere a liar can't reach. The man in today's story spent 20 years of his life learning that lesson in the ugliest classrooms on earth. His job in the army wasn't kicking doors. His job was walking into a place after the shooting stopped and finding what somebody had taken the trouble to bury: weapons, ledgers, hard drives, bodies. He got very good at one specific idea, and it's the idea I want you to keep in your head the whole time you're listening. People bury things because burying works. It works right up until one person with patience decides to dig in daylight, on the record, with the right paperwork in his hand. So when his 11-year-old daughter's smartwatch opened a live channel from 400 miles away, and he heard a grown man drag her across a kitchen floor by her hair, he did something almost nobody would have the discipline to do. He didn't scream. He didn't call 911. He hit record, and he started building a file. This one gets dark before it gets good. Stay with me. The ending is worth it. Roark Quillen grew up 11 miles from a place that officially did not exist anymore. The Dunsmore Army ammunition plant sat on 19,000 acres of southern Missouri scrub and hickory, behind 81 miles of chain link that the government stopped repairing in 1994. It had made artillery propellant for 3 wars. At its peak, in 1953, it employed 6,000 people, and one of them was Roark's grandmother, who ran a nitrocellulose line in a building with walls designed to blow outward so the roof wouldn't come down on the women inside. His mother had worked there too, in the last years, on the paperwork side, filing shipment manifests in a room that smelled like carbon paper and ether. When Dunsmore closed, it didn't get taken apart. It got covered up, in the literal sense. There were things at a plant like that which couldn't be sold, couldn't be trucked, and couldn't be burned in the open anymore. So the Army did what the Army did in those years. It dug long trenches out on the far northwest quadrant, past the rail spur, in a grid the old-timers called the Q line, and it put things in the ground and wrote down where. Some of those trench cards were precise to the foot. Some of them said things like MISC, energetics, assorted, approx, and a date. Roark's father spent the last 4 years of his life coughing up something the VA and the county health department disagreed about, and died at 53 with a folder of denied claims in his nightstand. That folder was the first record Roark ever memorized. He could still recite the case numbers. He used to think that was a strange thing to carry around. Later he understood it was the whole reason he became who he became. He enlisted at 19. He was not, by his own account, especially brave. He was patient, which is a different and rarer thing, and he had an unusual kind of attention. He noticed when the dirt in one part of a field was a slightly different color than the dirt beside it. That's a real skill, and in the years after 2003 the Army was desperate for it. Roark spent his 20s in ordnance disposal and his 30s in a small joint unit that had a boring name on paper and a different name in the buildings where it actually worked. Task Force Nightjar did sensitive site exploitation. That's the polite phrase. In practice, when a compound got cleared, Nightjar was the team that came in behind the shooters and turned the place into evidence. They mapped it, photographed it, pulled the drives, tagged the crates, ran the ground-penetrating radar over the courtyard, and found the second floor under the first floor. 14 people, 6 of them civilians on paper, a couple of trucks full of gear that cost more than the houses they parked next to. Roark's whole professional religion fit on an index card he kept taped inside his kit for 11 years. Find it. Prove it. Don't touch it until the record says so. He had watched good cases evaporate because an angry man in a hurry moved a box 6 inches before the camera came out. He had also watched, once, in a valley he still didn't talk about, a very bad man walk free in a foreign courtroom, because the only proof of what he'd done lived in the memory of soldiers who weren't allowed to say where they'd been. That case was Nightjar's last. In 2016, the task force wrote a report about an American reclamation contractor that had been buying recovered ordnance components out of a war zone through 3 layers of shells and selling them into the commercial explosives market. The report named a company, It named a retired colonel who sat on that company's advisory board. It went up the chain in March, and in June the task force was dissolved, its members scattered to other units with excellent evaluations, and the report was sealed under a classification that had nothing to do with protecting sources. Nobody ever told them why. Nobody had to. Roark and the other four learned the lesson the way adults learn things, quietly and permanently. Vic Solano got out and went into insurance investigation, because at least the money there was honest about what it was. Ruby Craddock became a flight paramedic in Tulsa. Bickford Yarborough, who could read a soil profile like a paragraph, went and got a hydrology degree and started testifying about groundwater for people suing landfills. Deschler Fanning went to work hanging off ropes welding bridges, because he liked jobs where the risk was visible. Roark stayed in. He had a daughter by then, and an ex-wife, and a mortgage on a small house in Dunsmore, and the Army was the only thing he'd ever been unquestionably good at. They made him a chief warrant officer and put him at a schoolhouse 400 miles west, teaching young soldiers how to look at a piece of ground and know it had been disturbed. He taught the index card to every class. Find it, prove it, don't touch it until the record says so. He believed it. He'd built a whole life on it. He had no idea, standing in front of a classroom in his 42nd year, how expensive it was about to get to keep believing it. Meadow Quillen was 11, and she had a theory about her father that she'd never said out loud to him because she was afraid it would embarrass them both. The theory was that her dad wasn't quiet because he was sad. He was quiet because he was listening to more things than other adults were. She'd noticed it when she was 7, at a fireworks show in Poplar Bluff, when he flinched at nothing 3 seconds before a shell went off wrong and the crowd got moved back. She'd noticed it every time they went walking on the county land near the old plant fence, and he'd stop and look at a low place in the grass and say, in a normal voice, "Somebody put something here once," and then keep going like he'd commented on the weather. Her parents had divorced when she was 6. It was not a dramatic divorce, which Meadow later understood was a kind of gift. Danica had married Roark at 22 when he was gone 300 days a year, and by 30 she had built an entire life that fit in the shape of his absence, and then discovered she didn't want to leave it when he came back. She wasn't cruel about it, she just stopped waiting, and then she told him, and he didn't fight because he could see the arithmetic as clearly as she could. They shared custody like two people who had decided their kid was the actual point. Roark had Meadow on his leave blocks and every summer. Danica had her the rest of the time in the house on Chandler Street, with the wind chime made of old brass casings that Roark's Aunt Orpha had given them as a wedding present, and nobody had ever taken down. For 4 years, that arrangement worked. Then Danica met Greer Bledsoe at a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department, and everything in Dunsmore started to bend. The Bledsoes were not new money in that county. They were the only money. Ransom Bledsoe, 66, had started with 2 dump trucks in 1979 and turned Bledsoe Salvage and Environmental into the firm that handled asbestos abatement for the school district, the transfer station for the county, the demolition contract for the old hospital, and since 2019, the site remediation subcontract for the Dunsmore plant's northwest quadrant. His sons ran the pieces. Ogden ran equipment and could put a track hoe through a doorway without touching the frame. Rankin ran what the family called county relations, which meant he knew what every commissioner owed and to whom. And Greer, the youngest and the handsome one, ran sales, which mostly meant standing in rooms with a good haircut, making people feel like they'd been let in on something. Greer was 38 and charming in a way Roark could not, at first, find any fault with. He came to Meadow's Christmas concert. He fixed the gutter on Danica's house without being asked. He shook Roark's hand at a handoff in a gas station parking lot and said, "She talks about you constantly, man. You should hear it." And Roark drove 400 miles back to post that night, thinking, well, all right, good. Let it be easy for once. And he'd remember that drive for the rest of his life. The first bruise came in October, on the back of Meadow's arm, in the shape of nothing in particular. She said she fell off the porch rail. In November, there were 2 on her shins, and she said soccer, and she wasn't on a soccer team. In January, on a video call, she was sitting in a way that made Roark's stomach go cold, carefully, at an angle, with her weight on one hip, And when he asked her about it, she said, brightly, in a voice she'd clearly practiced, "I'm fine, Dad. Everything's fine here." She said it exactly the way people say things when someone is standing off camera. Roark did not explode. This is the part that people who tell this story later always get wrong, because it doesn't feel satisfying. He did not drive 14 hours and kick a door off its hinges. He sat in his truck in a parking lot in the dark for 40 minutes, and he thought about a valley he didn't talk about, and a very bad man walking out of a courtroom, and an index card taped inside a kit bag. Then he called Ada Fenno, the school nurse in Dunsmore, who had bandaged his own knees in 1993, and asked her one question. If a kid came to you, and you were worried, and you wrote it down, where does the writing go, and who can see it? And Ada Fenno was quiet, for a second too long before she answered him. What Ada Fenno told him, carefully, in the language of a woman who liked her job and needed it, was that she had written Meadow Quillen's name in the log 4 times since September, that 2 of those entries had been reviewed and closed within a day, and that the person who reviewed them worked out of an office that shared a hallway with the County Family Services liaison, and that the liaison's brother-in-law was named Rankin Bledsoe. "I'm not saying anything," Ada said. "I want you to understand I'm not saying anything." "You said plenty," Roark told her. "Thank you." He drove to Dunsmore on his next 4-day. He did not confront anyone. He took his daughter to get pancakes and then to the county library, and while she read, he asked her a question he had asked exactly 100 times in his career, in 3 languages, and never once to a child. "If something happened," he said, "and you wanted me to know, but you couldn't tell me, what would you do?" Meadow was quiet. Then she said, "I don't know." So he built her a way. The watch was a cheap kid's model, the kind with a rubber band and a screen the size of a stamp, sold to parents who want to track a bus route. It did 4 things: location, a call button, a step counter, and a feature the manufacturer advertised for finding a lost phone that was, functionally, a live microphone. If Meadow held the crown button for 3 seconds, the watch opened an audio channel to the paired parent device and kept it open until someone hung up. It also logged the event with a timestamp on the company's server, in a place a subpoena could reach. Roark set it up at the library table with the manual open. He didn't tell her what it was for. He told her it was so she could tell him about her day whenever she wanted, even if he was busy, and that his phone would just record it and he'd listen later, like a voicemail. "So it's like a message," she said. "It's like a message. What if I press it by accident? Then I'll hear you doing homework," he said, "and I'll be extremely bored, and that's fine." She laughed. He fastened it on her wrist and made her practice the 3-second hold twice, and then he made her practice it once more with her hand under the table where nobody could see, and if she thought that was strange, she didn't say so. Kids know more than we give them credit for. She looked at him for a second with an expression he'd never seen on her, and then she nodded like a person accepting a job. Then he went back to post and did the thing he was actually good at. He started a file. Not a metaphor. A physical accordion folder in his footlocker and a mirrored folder in cloud storage with 2-factor authentication, and inside it, in chronological order, screenshots of every video call with the date visible, a photograph of the October bruise Meadow had let him take, for my phone background, dork. A written note of Ada Fenno's exact words with the time of the call, the custody order, and the Dunsmore school nurse's log request, submitted through the proper channel with a return receipt. He also, out of a habit he couldn't have explained yet, started a second file about something entirely unrelated, or so he thought. His Aunt Orpha still lived in Dunsmore, 74, sharp as a tack, on a road that ran along the plant's eastern fence. She had complained to him at Christmas that she couldn't sleep because of the trucks. "Which trucks?" he asked, mostly to be polite. "The ones going in at night," she said. "Bledsoe trucks. 2, 3 in the morning, 3 or 4 nights a week since fall, going in the northwest gate and coming out heavy, and the sound they make going over the cattle guard when they're loaded is different than when they're empty. Roark, I've lived here 51 years. I know what heavy sounds like." He asked her to write down the dates and times. She said why. He said, "Because a piece of paper with your handwriting on it is worth more than both of us remembering." Orpha Quillen kept that list on a yellow legal pad on her kitchen table for the next 5 months. It would eventually be entered as Government Exhibit 41. By March, Meadow had used the watch twice, both times for nothing in euro. Once to tell him a dog had followed her home. Once to cry for 8 minutes about a girl named Presley at school. Roark listened to both recordings twice and saved them, and told himself the whole apparatus had been an overreaction by a paranoid man. Then, in April, the Dunsmore Middle School 6th grade took a field trip to the plant's public interpretive area, a mowed half-acre by the south gate with a decommissioned howitzer and 3 plaques about the war effort. And Meadow Quillen, being her father's daughter, wandered 30 yards off the mowed part, into the scrub along the old rail spur, and found something in a washout where the spring rain had cut a channel. It was a brass tag, about the size of a poker chip, green-black with age, stamped with a set of numbers and 2 letters, a run of digits, a dash, then Q9. She brought it home in her jacket pocket because it was pretty. She showed it to her mother at the kitchen counter. And Greer Bledsoe, who was standing at the sink with a beer, went very still, put the beer down, and said, in a voice Meadow had never heard him use, "Where did you get that?" That was April 11th. The first time he hit her was April 12th. There is a version of this story where a man in an office 400 miles away gets a phone call and everything changes at once. That isn't what happened. What happened was slower and worse. Meadow stopped answering video calls with the camera on. She said the Wi-Fi was bad. Then she said she was tired. In May, she missed 9 days of school, which Roark only learned in June, because the absence notifications went to the custodial parent's email. When he did get her on a call, she was flat in a way that frightened him more than crying would have, and twice she looked off camera before answering a question about what she'd had for dinner. He filed for an emergency modification of custody on the 2nd of June. He hired a family law attorney in Springfield named Carries Bode, and he did it the boring, expensive, correct way. Motion, affidavit, documented concerns, request for a guardian ad litem. Carries Bode was good. She was also honest with him, which is why he trusted her. "You have a nurse who won't put her name on anything," she said. "You have 4 bruises, with innocent explanations from the child herself. You have a mother with no criminal record, and a stepfather with no criminal record, in a county where his family paves the roads. Roark, I will file this, but I want you to hear me. We will lose the first hearing. What we're doing is starting a clock." "Then start it," he said. They lost the first hearing on the 19th of July. It took 11 minutes. Danica testified that her ex-husband had struggled with the divorce. Greer Bledsoe wore a gray suit and said he loved that little girl like his own, and that the door of their home was always open. The guardian ad litem, a man named Fowler who handled 40 cases at a time, wrote that he found no immediate safety concern. The judge kept the existing arrangement and suggested family counseling in a tone that meant, "We're done here." In the parking lot afterward, Greer caught up to Roark by the truck. He was grinning. He put his hand on the doorframe, friendly, the way a man does when he wants you to know he's not afraid to be within arm's reach. "No hard feelings," he said. "Seriously, you've got a job. It's a big job. I get it. You're away. That's not a knock." He glanced back at the courthouse, then leaned in a couple inches. "But you gotta understand something. In that house, you're a story. You're a picture in the hallway. She hears your name maybe twice a week." He smiled wider. "You're a ghost, man." Roark said nothing. He was looking at Greer's boots. They were work boots, not court boots. The man had come to a custody hearing in a suit jacket, and steel-toe Wolverines with dried gray clay in the welt. Not creek mud, not garden soil. A fine, chalky, high-pH gray that Roark had seen in exactly one place in his life, on the far northwest quadrant of a closed ammunition plant, where the old trench caps had been sealed with a lime-treated cover. He drove 400 miles back to post that night, with 2 thoughts sitting side by side in his head, and no idea, yet, that they were the same thought. 1. My daughter is being hurt. 2. Those trucks are not doing remediation. You don't get cap clay on your boots from hauling clean fill. You get it from opening something. On the night of August 4th, Chief Warrant Officer Roark Quillen was sitting on a cot in a range shack in western Kansas, 406 miles from Chandler Street, grading a stack of terrain worksheets by headlamp. At 9:41 p.m., his phone buzzed with a notification he had configured 11 months earlier and had almost forgotten. Live audio meadow. He picked it up. He heard breathing, fast and shallow, and a television somewhere, and then his daughter's voice, very small and very close to the microphone, saying, "Dad, Dad." I pressed it. And then a door, and a man's voice saying her name in a way that made every hair on Roark's arms stand up. He did 3 things in the next 4 seconds, in this order. He hit the screen record button on his phone, which captured both the audio stream and the running clock and the device identifier at the top of the display. He opened his laptop with his left hand and started a second capture on a separate machine. And he did not make a sound, because his daughter had a live microphone on her wrist, and the man in the room did not know it, and the only thing in the world that could ruin that was Roark shouting her name. The recording is 9 minutes and 14 seconds long. It has been played in a federal courtroom. It is, according to a prosecutor who has been doing this for 26 years, the worst thing she has ever entered into evidence, and she has entered a lot of things. What Roark heard was this. A conversation that started about a brass tag, Greer Bledsoe wanting to know who else Meadow had shown it to, Meadow saying nobody, over and over, her mother's voice in the background saying, "Just tell him, baby, just answer him." A chair scraping, then the sound of a child being pulled or not hit, not yet, or pulled across a floor, and the specific noise a kid makes when someone has a fistful of her hair, which is a noise Roark would rather have gone the rest of his life without learning. The kitchen door, the screen door, outside now, gravel, the porch. Meadow screaming for him, not for help, for him. "Dad, Dad!" As if he were parked at the curb, as if he had ever once in her life been close enough for that to work. And then Greer Bledsoe's boot on her chest, which you can hear, and which you can hear because she stopped being able to scream. And then Greer's voice, breathing hard, delighted, right down at her level. "Yell for him again. Go on. Yell. You know what your daddy is? Your daddy's a ghost story, kid. He ain't coming. He's never coming." And behind him, close, holding the phone that was filming it, because you can hear the shutter tone and the little chirp when a video starts. Danica Bledsoe laughing. Not a nervous laugh. Not hysteria. The loose, easy laugh of someone at a bar who has just watched a friend do something ridiculous. She said, "Greer, Greer, stop." Her face is rue. And then she laughed again and said, Okay, get her up." 9 minutes, 14 seconds. Now here is the part I need you to understand, because everything that follows depends on it. Roark Quillen did not call 911. Let me say plainly what that decision cost him, because he has been asked about it under oath, and he has never once pretended it was easy. Calling 911 that night would have sent a Dunsmore County deputy to Chandler Street inside 20 minutes. It also would have sent whichever deputy was on shift, in a department of 19 sworn officers, run by Sheriff Lyman Teal, who had been elected 4 times, whose campaign signs were stored in the winter in a Bledsoe salvage warehouse, and whose chief deputy had married Ransom Bledsoe's niece. It would have generated a call for service that Rankin Bledsoe would have known about before the cruiser hit the street. It would have given a family with track hose and 40 employees and a lawyer on retainer somewhere between 4 and 8 hours of warning. And in Roark's professional experience, 4 to 8 hours of warning is the difference between a crime scene and a clean floor. His daughter was on the ground with a boot on her chest, and he made the coldest calculation of his life. They are not going to kill her tonight, and if I do this loud, they will bury it the way they bury everything, and I will lose her forever in a courtroom, 11 minutes at a time. So instead, he called a man in Tulsa who had not answered a phone call from him in 3 years. Vic Solano picked up on the 4th ring, said Roark, in the voice of someone whose whole nervous system has just woken up, and Roark said 7 words. "Nightjar. It's my kid. I need everybody." And Vic Solano, who was 44 years old and had a mortgage and a fiancé and a very normal job investigating staged rear-end collisions, said, "Where and when?" like no time had passed at all. They came in under 30 hours. Ruby Craddock got off a helicopter shift in Tulsa at 6 a.m., slept 90 minutes, and drove. Bickford Yarborough canceled a deposition in Kansas City and told a partner at a law firm that a family emergency had come up, which was the most true thing he'd said all year. Deschler Fanning climbed down off a bridge outside Paducah at noon, drove home, packed a bag with a set of coveralls and a camera, and left a note for his girlfriend that said, "Back Tuesday, love you, I'll explain." They met in the back room of a barbecue place in Rolla, Missouri, because it had one door and a table big enough, and because Vic Solano had a rule about not conducting business anywhere with a corporate Wi-Fi network. Roark played them the 9 minutes. Nobody spoke for a while afterward. Ruby Craddock, who had put her hands inside more human beings than the rest of them combined, was the first one to say anything, and what she said was, "Okay, say the word and I'll go get her tonight, and you'll never see me again." "No," Roark said. "Roar have, no." He put both hands flat on the table. "If we go get her, I'm a fugitive. She's a kidnapped child, and they're the family that got wronged. They'd have custody permanently, inside a month, and the video of that night disappears, and the man who did it is a victim in the newspaper." He looked around the table. "We're not going to rescue her. We're going to make the state of Missouri and the United States government come and take her. In daylight, on the record, because they have no other legal choice. And then, we're going to make sure the reason they have no choice is the worst thing that ever happened to that family." Deschler Fanning said, "That's a lot of moving parts, Chief." "It's exactly one moving part," Roark said. "It's the same job. Somebody buried something. We find it, we prove it, and we don't touch it until the record says so." Vic Solano was already writing on the back of a placemat. Here's what Roark laid out for them that night, and I want you to appreciate the architecture of it, because this is where the story turns from a tragedy into something else. Fact 1. A man had assaulted his daughter, and that was a state-level child abuse case in a county the abuser's family effectively owned. On its own, it was a loser. Fact 2. That man had lost his mind over a brass tag stamped Q90, a tag that Roark, who had grown up 11 miles from that fence, was fairly sure was an old trench identification marker from the Q-line burial grid. Fact 3. Bledsoe Salvage and Environmental held a subcontract to remediate the Northwest Quadrant, which paid them by the ton of material transported to an approved disposal facility. Fact 4. Roark Quillen had 5 months of handwritten dates and times of loaded trucks leaving through the Northwest Gate at 3 in the morning, which is not when a legitimate remediation contractor moves regulated waste, because the whole point of that contract is that everything is weighed, manifested, escorted, and done in daylight. "They're not remediating," Bickford Yarborough said slowly. He'd gone very still, the way he did over a soil log. "They're mining it." "Say it plain," Ruby said. "The trenches are full of stuff the Army paid to make and then paid to bury," Yarborough said. "Copper driving bands, brass, aluminum, and propellant M6, single base, stable as a brick if it's dry, and worth real money to the wrong buyer, because it's the same chemistry as commercial blasting product, and there's a shortage. They dig a trench, they pull anything with resale value, they backfill with clean county dirt, they recap it, and they bill the government by the ton for hauling material to a disposal site that's getting invoices for tonnage it never received." He looked up. "It's the perfect crime, honestly. Nobody in the world is ever going to go dig up a trench to check." "Except," said Vic Solano, "somebody already did, in 2016, and we wrote the report." The room went quiet in a completely different way. The 2016 report had a name on it. Not the shell companies, those changed every 18 months, but the retired colonel who sat on the advisory board of the reclamation firm that had been buying recovered ordnance components in a war zone and selling them into the commercial market through Rotterdam and then Houston. His name was Ivo Sperling. He had made brigadier general on his way out. He now consulted for 4 companies, sat on 2 university boards, and appeared occasionally on cable news as a serious man with a serious voice. Vic Solano spent 11 days doing what he did for insurance companies, which is follow money through the boring parts. He didn't need classified access. He needed a laptop and patience. Bledsoe Salvage and Environmental had won the Dunsmore subcontract in 2019 as a minority partner on a bid led by a firm called Chalkline Holdings. Chalkline's registered agent shared an address with 2 other entities, One of those entities had, in 2021, paid a consulting fee to a limited liability company in Virginia whose sole member was Ivo Sperling. "He didn't just get our report killed," Vic said, when he laid the chain out on the wall of a rented storage unit in Rolla that had become their operations room. "He got our report killed, and then he took the business model home with him and set it up domestically. Why buy recovered ordnance overseas and smuggle it, when the U.S. Army buried 19,000 acres of it in the 1970s and forgot?" Ruby Craddock said, "So we're not going after a stepdad." "We were never going after a stepdad," Roark said. "The stepdad is a symptom. We're going after the ground." But the ground took time, and Meadow was in that house right now. And this is the part where the story could easily have gone wrong. Roark did 4 things in parallel. First, the medical record. He could not force an examination. He didn't have custody. But he had a legal visitation weekend on August 16th, and he used every minute of it. He drove Meadow to Springfield, to a child abuse pediatrician named Dr. Esperanza Villalobos, who did a full skeletal survey. It took 2 hours. The films showed a healing fracture of the left fifth rib approximately 6 to 10 weeks old, a healed buccal fracture of the right distal radius that no one had ever set, and periosteal reaction along the left tibia consistent with a blunt injury from roughly the previous winter. Dr. Villalobos came out and sat down next to Roark in the hallway and said, "Mr. Quillen, I need you to understand what I'm looking at. This isn't an incident. This is a calendar." He said, "I know. I need it written that way." She wrote it that way. 31 pages, with dates, with ranges, with the phrase "inconsistent with the history provided," appearing 9 separate times. Second, the mother. Everybody who hears this story wants Donica to be a monster, and there's a version of the truth where she is one, and Roark has never asked anyone to feel sorry for her. But Vic Solano got the phone records under Bode's subpoena in September and found something that reframed the whole house. For 11 months, roughly every 10 days, Danica Bledsoe had sent a video file to a number belonging to Rankin Bledsoe. Not Greer. Rankin, the county relations brother. "She's not filming for fun," Vic said. "She's filming proof of compliance. Somebody's holding something over her, and she's sending in receipts." It turned out to be so mundane, it was almost funny. In 2019, before she'd married Greer, Danica had worked 9 months as a bookkeeper at Bledsoe Salvage, and she had signed 41 weight tickets. 41 federal documents, with her signature, certifying tonnage that had never moved. Rankin Bledsoe had explained to her, gently, one afternoon in a truck, exactly how many years that was. She was in the video laughing because she had been taught that flinching was the dangerous thing. Third, the girl on the inside. Roselle Bledsoe was 16, Rankin's daughter, a junior who wanted to study veterinary medicine and had not spoken to her father since a Thanksgiving fight nobody would explain. Roark never approached her. Ruby Craddock did, at a barn where Roselle volunteered on Saturdays, and Ruby did not ask her for anything. Ruby told her the truth for 20 minutes and then left a card. Roselle called 8 days later. She said, "There's a shed at my grandpa's with a filing cabinet in it, and I know where the key is." Then she said, "Is it true he stood on her?" Ruby said, "Yes." Roselle said, "Okay." What Roselle Bledsoe photographed over the following 3 weeks, on a phone, 1 page at a time, was the second set of books. Bledsoe Salvage kept 2 logs for the Northwest Quadrant, the manifest log that went to the government, and a spiral notebook in Ogden's handwriting that recorded what actually came off each trench line: weights of brass, weights of copper, sacks of propellant grain, and the initials of the buyer's driver. The buyer's initials appeared 306 times. Y.O. Yancey Ostrowski ran a company in Oklahoma that sold reclaimed energetics to quarries, seismic survey outfits, and, at a comfortable legal distance, the fireworks trade. Fourth, and this is the one that mattered most, Bickford Yarborough figured out what was in Q9. He did it the way a hydrologist does, with public records. Every closed Army ammunition plant has a mountain of environmental documentation, and most of it is available to anyone willing to read 400 pages of appendix. Yarborough pulled the 1994 closure survey, the 2003 groundwater monitoring reports, and a 1977 trench card index that had been scanned so badly it was nearly illegible. Trenches Q1 through Q8 were routine: contaminated soil, obsolete propellant, scrap. Q9 was different. Q9 had a different cover specification: thicker, lime-treated, with a marker layer, and a one-line entry that Yarborough read out loud to the room 3 times before anyone said anything. Bulk WP, unserviceable, sealed containers, do not disturb, refer HQ. White phosphorus, Ruby Craddock said. Somewhere between 4 and 9 tons of it, if the volume estimate is right, Yarborough said. In containers that were already failing in 1977, which is why they buried it instead of shipping it. And here's the thing you all need to hear. He took his glasses off. White phosphorus ignites on contact with air. It burns at about 800 degrees. You cannot put it out with water. You can only smother it, and when the smothering stops, it relights. If somebody puts a track hoe bucket through Q9 on a dry night with a west wind, the plume goes over Dunsmore in about 40 minutes, and you're evacuating 2,000 people, assuming anybody figures out fast enough what they're breathing. Roark said, "They don't know. They know it's a trench with better metal in it than the last 8, Vic said. They're working the Q line in order. They finished Q8 in June. Nobody had to do the arithmetic out loud." So the last piece of the plan wasn't about revenge at all. It was about a deadline. Here is what Roark Quillen built, over 11 weeks, with 4 people who had scattered to 4 states and a 16-year-old girl with a phone. He did not raid anything. He arranged for the Bledsoes to be caught in the act, on federal ground, by the only agency with no local strings on it, at a moment of his choosing and, because he was who he was, he arranged for the moment of his choosing to be the one that made the trench safe, instead of the one that made it burn. The legal hinge was a boundary. Yarborough found it in the 1994 closure survey. When the plant closed, the state took title to the southern 11,000 acres for the conservation area, but the northwest quadrant everything past the rail spur, including the entire Q line, had never been transferred. It was still, in law, a federal installation with an accepted jurisdiction status, which meant that theft from it wasn't county larceny. It was a federal offense, and the unauthorized excavation and transport of recovered military energetics off of it was several more. Vic Solano put the package together the way they used to put packages together. Chronology first, exhibits numbered, 1 page up front that a busy person could read in 90 seconds. Orpha Quillen's legal pad, Roselle's 306 photographs, the manifest discrepancies, the chalkline chain to Ivo Sperling, the 1977 trench card, and, at the very back, the 9 minutes and 14 seconds, because Roark had insisted it go in last. Put it first, Vic argued. It's the thing that makes them care. Put it last, Roark said, so nobody can say we built a federal case to win a custody fight. They sent it to ATF Special Agent Zora Mankins in the Kansas City field office on the 22nd of October, and then they waited 11 days, which Roark described later as the longest deployment of his life. Mankins called on the 12th day. Her first question was not about the trench or the money. It was, "Chief Quillen, is your daughter safe tonight?" He said, "No, ma'am, she isn't. She hasn't been since April." Mankins said, "Then let's fix that first." They fixed it first. On the morning of November 8th, at 7:10 a.m., while Meadow Quillen was standing at the end of the driveway on Chandler Street waiting for the bus, a state child abuse investigator named Perla Dorado brought in from the next judicial circuit at Carrie Bode's specific request, because nobody in Dunsmore County was going to touch it, served an emergency ex parte order on Danica Bledsoe at her front door. Greer Bledsoe came out onto that same porch in his socks and got about 11 words into telling Investigator Dorado what her job was, before she said, "Sir, there are 2 troopers at the end of your driveway. Step back inside." The order was based on 31 pages from a child abuse pediatrician, a school nurse's log obtained by subpoena, and a 9-minute audio recording with a verified device timestamp. It took an hour and 40 minutes to execute. Roark was not there. He had been told, explicitly, by both his attorney and Agent Mankins, that he would be 400 miles away with a documented alibi, and he had agreed without arguing, and Ruby Craddock later said it was the hardest thing she ever watched a man do: sit in a truck stop in Kansas with his phone face down on the table. Meadow was placed with Roark's Aunt Orpha, 11 miles from the fence, that same afternoon, pending a full hearing. She had, at that point, a healing rib, a wrist that had set crooked, and a habit of asking permission before she opened the refrigerator. Now, the trench. Agent Mankins had a problem, and she said so plainly. She had a paper case that would take a year to build into indictments, and she had a burial cell of unstable white phosphorus that a family of contractors was going to hit with an excavator sometime in the next few months. She could not simply arrest them for what they were about to do, and if she moved too early, the Bledsoes' lawyers would frame the whole thing as a federal overreach cooked up by an angry ex-husband. Roark said, "Then let them do it. Just let them do it where you're standing, on a night you choose, on a trench that's already empty." It took 3 weeks and 4 agencies to arrange, and it is, to my knowledge, one of the strangest joint operations ever run on American soil. Between the 18th and 24th of November, under an emergency environmental authorization, an Army technical escort unit of the people who handle recovered chemical and energetic material for a living, quietly excavated Q9 from the north end, working nights, under vapor suppression, and removed 141 sealed containers of bulk white phosphorus that had been sitting 11 feet under southern Missouri since the Nixon administration. They took it out through the north gate, on the far side of the property from anyone watching. Then they put the cover back exactly as it had been, down to the ruts. Bickford Yarborough stood at that dig for 6 nights and did not sleep more than 4 hours in a row. He told me later that watching those containers come up, half of them corroded through, packed in dirt that had gone the color of a bruise, was the closest he had ever come to understanding what his old boss meant by the phrase "buried on purpose." Then they baited it. Rankin Bledsoe received, through an intermediary Yancey Ostrowski trusted, an offer. A buyer needed 40 tons of reclaimed copper and 800 pounds of propellant grain before Christmas, cash on delivery, and had heard the Dunsmore Q line was still producing. Ransom Bledsoe, 66 years old, who had started with 2 dump trucks in 1979, said yes. They came in through the northwest gate at 1:40 a.m. on December 2nd, 2 dump trucks, a service pickup, a lowboy trailer with a track hoe on it, 9 men. Ogden Bledsoe ran the hoe. Greer Bledsoe ran the ground crew, and he was in a mood, because his wife had moved out to her mother's in Poplar Bluff, and there was a custody hearing on the docket, and a federal investigator had been asking questions at the transfer station. The hoe put its first bucket into the Q9 cap at 2:04 a.m. There were, at that moment, 41 people watching them. ATF from Kansas City, Army CID, the Missouri State Highway Patrol staged on the county road, a 3-man technical team from the escort unit on the ridge in case anything had been missed. And on a hill 900 meters south, lying in wet grass with a spotting scope and no weapon of any kind, 5 civilians who had been told in the plainest possible language that they were observers, that they were not to move, and that the only reason they were being allowed on the property at all was that one of them had brought the case in, and Agent Mankins was a person who paid her debts. Roark watched a man he had shaken hands with in a gas station parking lot direct a crew into the ground where 4 to 9 tons of white phosphorus had been 3 weeks earlier. At 2:26 a.m., they stopped it. Floodlights, aircraft, the whole apparatus. 7 of the 9 went down on the dirt without a word. Greer Bledsoe ran. He ran north, along the trench line, in the dark, on ground he thought he knew, and Q9 was, at that point, a 200-foot open cut with soft backfilled walls and 11 feet of drop, and he went into it at a full sprint, and the north wall came down on top of him. Here is where the story ends up somewhere nobody expects. Roark Quillen was the closest human being to that trench who knew what a slope failure looks like from the inside. He was off the hill before anybody could tell him not to be. Deschler Fanning went with him, and what those 2 men did for the next 31 minutes, with a shovel and a length of trench, shoring off a Bledsoe service truck, and a state trooper feeding them plywood, was dig out the man who had put his boot on Roark's daughter's chest. Greer was buried to the sternum, both arms pinned, his face 6 inches out of the dirt, and he was making a sound Roark had heard a few times in his life and never forgotten, a high, animal please that isn't a word yet. He begged. He begged for 31 minutes. He begged the men digging him out to please, please, and at some point he recognized whose hands were on the shovel, and he started saying Roark's name, over and over. And then he said the thing that Assistant U.S. Attorney Aurelia Whitcomb would play for a jury 11 months later, because a trooper's body camera was 18 inches away and recording the entire time. I'm sorry about the girl. I'm sorry about the girl. Please, I'm sorry about the girl. Roark didn't answer him. He kept digging. When Greer's arms came free, Roark checked his radial pulse and his capillary refill, called out crush injury protocol to Ruby Craddock, who was arguing her way past 2 agents to get down there with a kit, and then he stood up and stepped back and let the paramedics work. Somebody asked him afterward, at a young agent, genuinely confused why he'd done it. Roark said, "Because I've spent 20 years telling people you don't get to touch it until the record says so." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "And because my daughter is going to grow up knowing exactly what her father is. So I'd like the answer to be accurate." The indictments came down in March. Ransom Bledsoe, 66, pleaded to conspiracy, theft of government property, and unlawful transport of explosive material, and got 19 years. Ogden got 14. Rankin, who had spent his life making problems go away in a county of 11,000 people, discovered how little that skill transfers to a federal courthouse in Springfield, and got 12, with an additional count for witness tampering after he tried to reach Roselle through her mother. Yancey Ostrowski cooperated in 48 hours and got 6. Ivo Sperling took the longest, because men like Sperling always do. It took 18 months, a Senate inquiry into why a 2016 task force report had been sealed, and the sworn testimony of 5 former members of a unit that the Department of Defense had spent 9 years declining to acknowledge existed. Roark Quillen testified for 6 hours in a room with the cameras off, and then, at the committee's request, for 40 minutes with them on. He was 51 words into his opening statement when he said the name Nightjar in public for the first time, and you can watch the moment on the record. A retired general in the 3rd row takes his glasses off and does not put them back on. Sperling was convicted on 11 counts. He is 73. He will not finish his sentence. Greer Bledsoe recovered from the crush injury, kept both legs, and went to trial because his father's lawyers wanted a fight. The jury got the 9-minute recording on a Tuesday, and the 31 minutes of body camera audio on a Wednesday, and they were out for less than 3 hours. He got 28 years on the federal counts and a consecutive state sentence for the child abuse. He is in a facility in Illinois. He has written Meadow 4 letters. Her therapist has them. Meadow has never asked to read one, and Roark has never once suggested she should. Danica Bledsoe pleaded to making false statements on federal documents and to child endangerment, cooperated fully, and served 22 months. She has supervised visitation, 4 hours a month, which she has never missed. Meadow calls her Danica now. Roark has never corrected her, in either direction. He says that's not his to referee. Roselle Bledsoe is 19, and in her 2nd year of pre-veterinary studies at Missouri State. Ruby Craddock drove her to freshman move-in. Roselle's testimony put her own father in prison, and when a reporter asked her about that, she said, "He taught me to write down what I saw. I don't think he meant it like this." Meadow Quillen is 14. Her wrist had to be rebroken and set properly, which she describes as the worst day of her life, which her father considers a small mercy, because it means the other days are not in first place. Roark retired in the spring, took a job teaching soil and site assessment at a community college in Rolla, and bought a house with a porch. The wind chime made of brass casings is on it. Aunt Orpha's legal pad is framed in the hallway, which Meadow finds deeply embarrassing when her friends come over. Last summer, a smaller version of the Dunsmore cleanup started for real, funded properly, with a public monitoring station and a website where anybody in that county can look up what's coming out of the ground this week. It exists because a 6th grader picked up a brass tag in a washout because it was pretty. That's the story. Now let me tell you what I actually think about it. We're taught that love looks like charging in, that the measure of a father is how fast he comes through the door. And I understand why it's a good story. It's the story every movie tells. And honestly, if Roark Quillen had gotten in his truck that night and driven 14 hours and beaten Greer Bledsoe half to death on that porch, most of us would have cheered. and Meadow would still be in that house. That's the part that keeps me up. Because a county sheriff who owed the Bledsoes his job would have arrested Roark before sunrise. The video on Danica's phone would have been deleted by breakfast, and a family court judge would have read one sentence, "Father assaulted stepfather in front of the child," and that would have been the end of it forever. What Roark did instead was harder than violence, and I don't think we say that enough. He listened to 9 minutes of the worst thing he will ever hear, and instead of screaming, he pressed record. He let his daughter stay in a house he could not stand for 103 more days, because he understood that the only thing that could get her out permanently was a file so heavy nobody could lift it off the table. He carried a cost most of us would not survive carrying. Here's the practical part, and it's not abstract. If you are ever in the position of protecting someone from a person with more power than you, rage is a flare, and paper is a fire. Write things down with dates. Get the medical record, even when you're told it isn't necessary, especially then. Understand that an institution's default is to close a file, and that the way you beat that is to make the file impossible to close. Find the one adult, the one nurse, the one neighbor with a legal pad, the one 16-year-old who's been waiting for somebody to ask. And know which door you're knocking on, because knocking on the wrong one gives them the 4 hours they need. The last thing. Everybody who hears this story remembers the line about the ghost, and I do too, but I've come to think the man got it exactly backward. He thought a ghost was somebody who wasn't there. A ghost is somebody who was there the whole time, and you didn't notice until it was way, way too late. If this one got to you, subscribe. I've got more of these coming. And if you know a kid who needs a way to reach someone, build them one. Tonight. It takes 20 minutes, and it costs about $40, and it's the cheapest insurance policy on earth. I'm Nathan. Take care of each other.